Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, college admission. Do you belong? A great article by Brennan Barnard of Forbes. Our question from a listener is part 1 of 2. Do West Coast liberal arts and science colleges that offer merit money also provide the rigor for a strong student that needs to be challenged? Our interview is part 1 of 3 with Vince Garcia on the UCs were extremely difficult to get into this year. What changed? And our college spotlight, the long-anticipated North Carolina A and T.
And he got it right. He got it right.
This ain't no Verizon.
So for those of you not following this, last week Dave called it North Carolina AT&T. And he's such a good sport that I said, Dave, I'm not deleting that from the final version. He said, go ahead, everybody, have a laugh at my expense.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, I'm looking at a text I got literally at 20 minutes ago. Dave and I are recording this at 8 a.m. I got this at 7:37 a.m. It's from Anika. It says, laugh out loud. Tell Dave all the Aggies are coming after him.
Well, we got it. I had to practice, Anika, but we got it down.
Awesome. Well, so friends, I am in an extremely festive mood. I am coming to you from Athens, Georgia, where our entire family is here. We rented a house through Airbnb. And later today, Joy walks the stage and officially becomes a graduate of the University of Georgia. So we'll look forward to that ceremony after our recording, Dave. And forgive me for getting so personal. Last week was a shout out to Anika. This week is a shout out to you, Joy, where she will start NC State immediately. In fact, by the time this goes live, she'll already be a Wolfpack.
Awesome. We got to have the sound engineer play some Pomp and Circumstance. Do, 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 do.
Or that stuff for like all. I love it when you go on these things and the confetti just goes bang and all over the place. But
that's right.
But we're proud of her. She graduates cum laude, last 2 semesters 4.0, 3.7 overall. It's not so much the GPA, it's the hard work. You know, the GPA is the byproduct. What I loved is just to see how she would go to these coffee shops and just hunker down and be there for hours. And she set a goal to turn all her assignments in 5 days before they're due. And I never did that, Dave. I mean, I was the king of procrastination and pulled the all-nighter. So she's disciplined beyond me.
These kids are great. Aren't you saying that she only has like 4 days between ending and beginning her next program?
Yeah, but you know what? It's actually a blessing because so she has to take. She's only taking 1 course in the May semester, and it's virtual. And then she'll take 2 in the June semester that are virtual, and then she'll move in. Oh, another thing we did this week: sign the lease.
Oh wow!
Sign the lease. It's official, and because she's broke, that means I signed the lease. I'm co-signing. You know, so August 1st, she'll move in there, and she's got a lovely apartment. We let her have a single this year just so she can, you know, she's in grad school, and I think she's earned that. So she's looking forward to her single. Speaking of Anika, Dave, she loved our transition. So thanks again to James. Thanks to you. She loved the AT. Oh, look at me. She loved the A&T tribute we're doing today, and she loved the transition tribute. So that was pretty cool. All right, I got a couple more announcements that are big ones here. So last week we announced that we are arranging panels of students, 3 to 4 students at schools you're interested in, where you can ask them any question and not have it filtered to the marketing of the admission office. Get to the real skinny of the school. The good news is we had over 100 colleges that have already come in that people are interested in. And that just literally went live. So we're getting a great response in terms of the listing of colleges. We would like to see more participants, though. So it's just a quick 6-question survey, and we're making it easier for you. It is still going to be in the show notes, so you can find it in the show notes. But if you're not a show notes kind of guy or gal, we've also added the survey to the website. You just go to yourcollegebounkid.com and then look under the resources tab, and you'll see a survey. Click the survey, 6 quick questions. The most important question on there is, what schools would you be interested in us comprising a group of students for this? So if you could please do that, it will help us out tremendously, because whichever colleges get the most suggestions, those are the ones that we're going to move forward on. And we want to actually start jumping on this right away, because the summer is actually a really good time to get students where they have a lot more flexibility and availability.
Awesome.
One more big announcement. So I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before on the podcast, but the busiest time for admission officers is September to May. So what I try to do is do a lot of my interviews over the back half of May, June, July, and August. And so I want to start something different this year, which is mention to you who's committed to do an interview. And you can send questions in, and I can actually ask questions that our listeners have. It doesn't have to all come from me. So some of the schools that have already committed to do summer interviews with me this summer, this could be a tongue twister. We've got the 3 Bs. Barnard,
yep.
Bucknell, Babson. And these
Barnard,
are all
Bucknell, Babson. Barnard, Bucknell,
There you
Babson.
go. You got it down, my friend. And these are all senior level people, VP of enrollment, Dean of admissions. No junior people here. Then we go to the A, Amherst College. So some of you may remember when I interviewed Emily Griffin, who's over their Career Center a couple years ago, on how to utilize the Career Center. Matt McGann told me, Mark, you interview Emily and I'll come on your podcast. And so now we're in the process of just nailing our date down. Chris Gruber from Davidson College, he's got over 30 years experience, will be on. And then we've got SLU, St. Louis University, a specialist coming on talking about transfer admissions. And then what's the saying? Was it Dave? Did you ever watch that movie? I can't believe I'm telling you about movies. You're the movie guy.
Which one is this?
That movie. That movie with oh my goodness, is it Michael Griffin? Wall Street. The movie Wall Street.
Oh, yeah, with Michael Douglas.
Michael Douglas. See how bad I am?
Charlie Sheen.
Yes,
Greed
you're the movie
is
guy.
good.
Yes, Greed is good. So I remember this line in that movie where they said, "Did you bag the elephant?" I think it was like landing a big deal was a stockbroker. So we did bag the elephant. We do have Gary Clark from UCLA coming on, and so that'll be a great interview about UCLA. So those are some of the ones that we've got coming up. And if you have questions for any of those, Barnard, Bucknell, Babson, Amherst, Davidson, St. Louis University, or UCLA, please send them in. And I'm working on some others, including some more West Coast ones. So I'll be announcing that in the future as I add additional interviews. Okay, Dave, it is time for our admissions tip. And our admissions tip looks at wait lists. And I'm noticing more of my students are getting off of the wait list this year. I'm noticing a lot more activity. And so the tip is you have to be ready to make a decision fast if they contact you. A lot of times what happens is students go through and it's all online. It used to be these cards you used to return back in the day when I did it. But now it's all online. You log in and you indicate if you want to be on the wait list. If they contact you, and by the way, another reason to be checking your email, because that's normally how they'll contact you. Some people make calls, but most are sending things out electronically. If they contact you, a lot of times they'll give you a week, sometimes 5 days, but it's not uncommon for a school to give you 1 or 2 days. And if you're not ready to commit, they're going to move on. So if you're on the wait list, just ask yourself, because a lot of times people go on the wait list for 3 or 4 schools. Say, am I ready to commit if one of these schools contacts me? And check your electronic communications. All right, Dave. We've been struggling over here a little bit, my friend.
Okay,
struggling with A-push. Struggling with last week. That one got you good, man. It's like the internet joke now. I find myself just saying A-push now. It's almost like BIPOC. We had that thing going for a while, remember?
That's right.
We had OMBA last week. So here's one I'm betting on you on this
That's
one.
right. Actually, the A-push was like when my daughter came back from a semester and I didn't realize I was asleep all my life and she was trying to make me woke.
All right, my friend, here we go. It is, I'm going to give you two versions.
Okay, let's go.
Suitcase college or suitcase campus?
Suitcase college or suitcase campus? Okay. I would think that would mean a commuter school because it has to do something probably with a commuter school because you're operating out of a suitcase.
So are you saying, what exactly are you saying?
It refers to commuter schools, the schools that where the majority of kids commute.
So I'm going to give you credit, my friend. I'm going to give you credit. This is confusing. This is the most confusing one because there are actually multiple definitions. There's some people that use suitcase school as the antithesis of commuter. Like there's a commuter school and there's a suitcase school. Commuter where you just go back and forth, and a suitcase school, residential, you need to have your suitcase. But the majority of people use a suitcase school to mean a place where people go home on the weekends all the time. Therefore, they need their suitcase, and the campus empties out, and therefore it lacks much of a residential presence on campus. So that's a winner. That's a winner.
Awesome.
It's been a long time. That's why I'm so happy. I'm so shocked. Okay.
Awesome.
Let's see if we can make it 2 in a row next week. The big number.
Big number. Let's do it.
The big number. And the big number this time is 12,813. 12,813. And it is the number of students that Tulane University waitlisted last year. So they waitlisted 12,813 students, and they only take 1,820. So for every one spot they have, Dave, they waitlisted 7.
Whoa.
No, it gets worse. Guess how many of those 12,813 they took off the wait list?
How many?
0. A bagel.
Whoa. So, okay, what is the reason for that? That's like saying, baby, I might invite you to a prom. Just stay on standby. Go out and buy your dress, and I'll call you the night of and let you know if I'm picking you up.
Just keep in mind when a school does their wait listing, they don't know what their yield will be. So if they think, let's just say a school's working off of an assumption they'll have a 40% yield, and so they waitlist a bunch of people, and then they end up getting a 45% yield, they'll over enroll, right? But if they have a 35% yield, now they may go and take hundreds off that wait list. So the decisions to waitlist are made before they know who's going to actually matriculate.
But why would they go so far over the? I'm going to
have to do that. That's beyond our big number status. Yeah. I'm going to do a deeper dive on that coming up. Actually, I'm actually looking at waitlists in 175 and bonus content. So gonna have to leave a little tease there. I'll answer Dave's question. Why would they go so far over? Bonus content, episode 175. Sorry, folks, got to wait 2 weeks for that one.
All right.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news. Take our article away, Dave. This is a great article and about an important topic.
It really is. And basically, it's College Admission, Do You Belong by Brennan Barnard of Forbes. And it's really about a topic that's affecting all of us, and especially 18 to 25-year-olds. And it is the subcaptioned, Are You Lonely? And Barnard basically points out that among 18 to 25-year-old kids, 61% were suffering from serious loneliness, according to a recent Harvard study. In fact, multiple studies have shown that 1/2 of college students have depression and or anxiety, and these rates are rising at an alarming level. So this article asks the question, are our schools equipping students with the tools necessary to find connection and the resiliency to handle it? In fact, the article has another subcaption, which is a crisis within a crisis, in which it says that depression was pre-existing, but everything about COVID has just worsened it. Kids think they're going back to campus, but they're not. They're staying in their dorms. They're doing online classes. Many of the social activities that we associate with college, from parties to extracurriculars to sports have been shut down. So we literally have the scenario of these kids holed up in their dorm room, staring into a computer screen, completely physically and emotionally divorced from their family, their friends, and even the college context that we might have been familiar with. And Barnard poses the question that as more individuals are vaccinated against the coronavirus, do we need to be seeking an antidote to the epidemic of loneliness? So, Mark, what I want to do is I want to basically briefly mention the two subjects that they talked about and throw it out to you so we can have a broader discussion.
Sure.
Okay.
You take it where you want to go, my friend.
Okay. So what? Bottom line is they started off with this study. It says in loneliness in America, how the pandemic has deepened the epidemic of loneliness and what we can do about it. And they posited three things. They said, number one, we need to provide people with information and strategies to help them cope. Number two, we need to build not just our physical, but our social infrastructure. And number three, we need to work to restore our commitment to each other and to the common good. So they broke it down into some projects that are going on for kids to prepare them for college, and then the things that kids can do to choose the right college and what they can do once they're in college. So, Mark, I want to talk about Project Wayfinder from Stanford. And it's a process where they're trying to reimagine adolescent education to develop a student's sense of meaning, purpose, and belonging. So what was your thoughts about Project Wayfinder and some of the steps that they advocated for preparing kids for college when we talk about loneliness and connection and feeling a sense of belonging?
I'll answer that question, but let me say a few things first.
Yeah.
So first thing I want to say is a normal process in searching for articles. I'm the one who picks articles out on our team. And the normal process I go through is I just scour like some of the best sources that consistently produce really good content when it comes to college admissions. And there's about 20 different publications I searched for to find the best articles. This one was a little bit different. I intentionally said, you know what, Dave? In fact, Dave, we even talked about it off air. I said, we've got to find an article that addresses the social isolation students are experiencing.
Yes.
Because what I'm experiencing in my own practice is so many kids who are struggling with the social isolation, much more so than the academic.
Absolutely.
You know, and I'm seeing kids who are struggling with things like anxiety and depression and low self-esteem. And it's because they're on Zoom all the time. And one of the reasons I even know it, Dave, is because, first of all, they normally will articulate that to me. They don't like it. But then I've seen multiple cases where when students went back to an in-person type of education, those maladies dissipated considerably. And the article actually refers to this. This is a quote from the article. It says, sure, we have social media, Zoom, and other 21st century ways of connecting. But here's what I love. But these are simply Band-Aids to cover a deeper sense of loneliness. The article draws heavily from making caring common, which is it's a whole project that's produced by Harvard Graduate School of Education that we have quoted many times on this podcast because they produce these major reports from time to time. And this is really what Brennan is doing is he's doing a distillation of the main points from the Making Caring Common project they did on loneliness. I mean, the article talks about how 61% of people 18 to 25 are reporting serious loneliness. And in the fall of 2020, half of college students showed indications of either depression or anxiety. And then it says, as college students search for a new community, do they even know what to look for? Do they even know what questions to ask for? So those are all some of the things I wanted to say. And I want to comment on the 3 points you made, Dave, and then I'll mention something about Wayfinder. So as Dave said, it talks about three main takeaways from the report. And if you want to look up the report, I'll tell you the full name. It's called Loneliness in America, How the Pandemic Has Deepened an Epidemic of Loneliness and What We Can Do About It. And so the first thing when it points out is come up with better strategies to cope with loneliness. And one thing that came to mind on this one, Dave, I was having a conversation with with Joy. And fortunately, I love my kids, and I'm so glad that they don't object to me using them as illustrations. Same for you, Dave, with Lauren. Because we put all their business on the street.
That's
You
right.
know, we really do. So I was saying, Karis the other day came in recently. She said, you know what? I'm attractive. I'm talented. I'm healthy. I feel really good about myself. And, you know, some people might say, gee, you're a braggart. But anyone who knows my daughter knows she's not a braggart. She just has really good self-esteem. And I was talking to Joy, and I was saying, you know, Joy, I kind of feel like Karis has more self-confidence than you. And she said, why did you say that? And then I told her what Karis said recently. And Joy said, remember, Joy's the mental health person over here, right? So Joy says, you know what Karis does better than me? And I'm working on it. She has better self-talk. And self-talk is extremely important. And these are the messages that you tell yourself. And so when it talks about come up with better strategies to cope with loneliness, one of them is self-talk. Just wanted to make that point. The other point it says is build not just your physical, but your social infrastructure. So these are things like finding your tribe on the college campus. So this is why I love like LLCs, living learning communities. This is why I love affinity groups. This is why finding the right sorority and fraternity can be fantastic at building your social infrastructure. I wanted to put some meat on the bones, Dave, because I think when you read their points, they're just a little bit abstract unless you concretize them.
They are.
You know?
Yes.
And the third point it said was work to restore our commitment to each other. So to me, that's reaching out to someone when you see them struggling. Don't just see it as their problem. See it as your problem. The same way you would with a biological sibling or a parent if they were struggling. That if you do that to your fellow man. So I wanted to comment on those. Now, that was all that. Now let me get to your Wayfinder point.
Yeah.
Okay, so Wayfinder is a program that's really taking off. It's a 3-year program. It started at Stanford based on a lot of research in 2018. And they're trying to reimagine adolescent education and to look at how do students develop a sense of meaning, purpose, and belonging. And so they literally come up with this curriculum. And this is a number of schools are using this curriculum, and they're really raving about it. So far, the curriculum has been used by over 50,000 students in 35 countries and in 30 different states. And the reason why this Wayfinder curriculum began in the first place was the researchers were asking students about their experiences, and they noticed that belonging was the single biggest theme that they came across. They're like, whoa, what's with this belonging theme? So they developed this whole theme starting the summer of 2018 that would focus on belonging and on connection. And the 3-year program, what it does is it equips students to ask the right questions and to intentionally find connection with others. So what tends to happen is that you either sort of willy-nilly or arbitrarily either find a connection or you don't. And this takes people through intentional exercises to help find a connection. And I just want to read one quote from a school I'm familiar with. I know some people here. It's Montclair Kimberly Academy in New Jersey. And they're talking about this belonging curriculum, which they implemented. And here's what it says. The belonging curriculum was a lifesaver. A platform we easily adapted to our needs and fostered some of the most rewarding conversations we have ever had with our incoming students. So I'll throw it back to you, Dave. I've been talking a while. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And, you know, this was not addressed in the article, but there was an interesting book a couple decades ago that talked about...
Let me guess, Bowling Alone?
Bowling Alone. You got it.
Yep.
We were thinking, you know.
Yep.
But it basically talked about the breakdown of the social activities and structures that bind us together as people. And I want to break, you know, one thing that's really been affected with COVID is the breakdown of church. Mark, we used to go to church quite often.
Yeah.
And we haven't gone to church, I think, in about 8 or 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, seeing it on TV is not the same thing. You know, I'm reminded that we have 5 senses. You know, there's feel, and there's smell, and there's touch, and there's sound, and there's sight. And you know, we've robbed ourselves of 3 of those. You know, I know with our own daughter, she was terribly lonely her first semester. And a lot of that was because we are a very close family. We hug every day. I say, I love you every day. She has, you know, she's really into dogs, and she hugs her dogs, and she hugs her mom. And she has that sense of belonging and that physicality. And that it's almost, to me, when you go to college now, in the absence of all these social structures, it's literally like sensory deprivation. These kids are in front of a computer. They're not smelling. They're not touching. They're not feeling. They just have sight and sound. It's almost like you're in an isolation box. And so I think the physical aspects of intimacy have totally been cut off. And I think that's underappreciated, and then the social structures that bring people together on a physical level, the shaking of the hands, the touching, if you're ever a part of a church that can be socially active Pentecostal, that's all missing. And then of course the activities that kids engage in, whether it be soccer or sports or choir or singing. These are physical ways of maintaining a sense of belonging. So I just want to stress that I don't think we appreciate how when you sit someone in front of a computer 8 hours a day and says, this is your world, how we are literally depriving them of the sensory, physical manifestations of intimacy that are so essential to feeling loved and to feeling belonging. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, it really makes a lot of sense. And I'm really glad, actually, I agree with everything you said there, Dave. Although, stop trying to make me a Pentecostal, man, just because it's your worship style. Other than that, but there's a little pushing it. But other than that,
like my brother and brother.
But what I will say, one thing I'm really glad you said, earlier when I was talking about finding a community, I gave 3 examples. I said living learning communities, LLCs. I said affinity groups. And I said sororities and fraternities. You gave a couple more that are great, which is intramural sports or team sports or joining a choir. There's other things as well, such as getting involved with a group, a consistent group that does community service. Just actually getting actively involved in any club where you can. Clubs are fantastic ways to develop that connection. Something else the article says, it also says the same research that was borne out by the Stanford group with Wayfinder was also borne out at the University of Pennsylvania with their character lab. And they've been studying this as well. And it says, here's a quote from the article. It says, as those who are college bound build application lists and choose a school, they must determine whether they will belong on a campus in the classroom, residence hall, community. Studies from the character lab at UPenn suggest that here's the key line, this feeling of fitting in is one of the most important predictors of success in college.
Absolutely.
And then it goes on to say this research is also supported by the firm EAB, as they've been doing research on student retention, persistence, and equity. And then the article goes on to say, well, how do you figure this out? And so it gives some of the kinds of questions that you should go through. And one thing it says is before you even start your journey, start with more of an introspection, like who am I? And what kind of person am I? And what kind of community do I need? And so I'll just read a few of the questions that there's a long list. I'm not going to read them all, but some of them it says, do I want a college that has a lot of school spirit? Believe it or not, if you're someone who's really into school spirit, that's extremely important. That's part of how your zeitgeist, your vibe. And then it says, do I feel a sense of community connection and belonging on campus? If so, how? And then it says, if I'm honest, do I see myself there, or am I allowing other factors to influence my decision? And then it ends with this really cool section. It's called Advice from the Pros.
Yeah.
And so what Brennan did is, and just so you know, first-time listeners, Brennan and I worked together from 2000 to 2004 at the Westtown School. So I've known Brennan now for 21 years. He's also been on our podcast twice. But he's a fantastic writer, and he's a director of college counseling. And I can't even list all the things he's involved. He's involved in a lot of things, but he's in the trenches, okay? He knows what's going on. And he's got a great network. So he reached out to a lot of people in his network, and he got quotes from them. And I just want to read a couple of my favorite quotes, Dave, and maybe I'll have you maybe make it a comment, and then maybe we can call it a day.
Great. I chose 2 of those quotes, so let me.
Okay. Well, why don't you start with the 2 you chose, and then
okay,
and then I'll throw in a couple others that maybe you didn't pick. Go ahead.
Well, one was from Emily, the dean of Olin College.
Yeah, I like that
one. She says, quote, belonging is about connections and being part of something beyond yourself, but it really starts with you. Emphasize you. Knowing who you are and what you want to learn, experience, or share is the first step to determine if you will feel a sense of belonging within a particular college community. So that was number 1.
Yeah, loved it.
And then number 2 was Jeff Schiffman of Tulane. He says, but remember, there is more than just one school where you belong.
Yes.
There are likely hundreds of schools out there where you will fit in quite well. So he says, don't overthink it. So those are my two quotes.
No, those are great. Those were two. I had about 5 of them, but those are two that I'd picked out as well. Another one I had here is from Lisa Keegan, who's at one of those B's I said earlier, Dave, when I did Bucknell, Babson, and Barnard. So Lisa's coming on our podcast. We've already done our pre-meeting, and it'll be great to have her on. She's fantastic. This is a quote from Lisa, who's the VP of Enrollment at Bucknell, and she says, I think the best way for applicants to know whether they will feel a sense of belonging is if they feel a connection during the search process. So, and then she says, you have to research further than just the campus tour. Get to know the people at the place. So that was great. And then one quote that came from Akil Balo, who's really a strong advocate of fair test and moving away from test scores and having such a prominent role. I thought about what you said earlier, Dave, about church. So this is what Akil says. He says, read the student newspaper, which I'm a huge advocate of. Talk to students, which obviously I'm setting up whole panels. And when I go to a college, I try to talk to 20 kids before I leave. So I'm huge on that. Investigate the community surrounding the institution. I'm huge on that. I encourage people to do that. And then he says, is there a barber shop? Is there a hairdresser that you can go to? And then here's what he says. Is there a house of worship? So for people for whom worship is important, that's really important. And then I'll say another thing. It's not in here, but I work with about 8 to 10 Jewish families a year. And for most of them, having a Jewish community is very important, and I work with, about the same number of South Asian families every year. And having a South Asian community is very important. So finding people who you can relate to, who you can identify. And here's another one that I like. It says, I'll make sure I give attribution because I'm going to shout somebody out. Okay, this is Emmanuel Moses, who's the Associate Director of College Guidance at the Opportunity Network. So he says, look less at diversity stats and focus more on how the institution promotes inclusion. I thought that was a really good one. Don't just look at the stats, but look at how are they actually creating inclusion.
And I just want to add to that, a big part of this article was talking about HBCUs. Sorry, HBCUs. Oh man, AT&T, come on down.
Just when you think you've mastered it, you got A&T down, but now you're back to your HBCU stumbles again.
Anika's cringing as she listens to the podcast.
Not just you, everybody at Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, and Xavier, Dillard, and everywhere else, man.
Get that man from community. HBCUs. Anyways, here's his quote. He says, quote, many Black students want to go where they can be celebrated, not tolerated. This is why HBCUs exist and are flourishing. So similar, everybody has community comfort zones, as I would like to say. And so it's important to know what yours is and what you look for in a college that'll accommodate that. So.
Yeah. And, this is off topic a bit. You want to build your network. So that quote that Dave had, that was from Shareem Herndon Brown. So Shareem, Brennan, and all of us were together at Westtown School. And you build your network when you go to these places and you keep in touch. And so Brennan's reaching out to people in this network, but Shareem and I are friends as well. And I'll also go back 20 years together. And that's a great quote from him. And he's got a new book coming out on this topic, which I'm excited about. The last one I want to read is from Thomas Baer, who's the Vice President of Enrollment Management at Rose-Hulman, a school we've done a spotlight on before. And he says this, which I love, and this is what I tell everybody to do on a visit. Have lunch on campus in the dining hall during a visit. Sit amongst the students. Listen to the conversation. Watch how students interact with one another. You'll get a sense of what is important to the student body and show you how they respect for one another or the lack of respect. And so often people want to just go to like the Gnosis restaurant in the area. If you're staying overnight, I encourage you to do that too. But eating in the dining room, people watching, observing, you can pick up a lot. So anyway, Dave, I think this was an awesome article.
Yes, I do want to add, though, when you saw this article, my frustration is that this is such a huge topic that we just sort of scratched the surface. I do want to make a very personal appeal because I see this in the emergency room all the time. If there is any individual or any student who is feeling depressed, especially if you're feeling suicidal or if you're feeling that things are overwhelming, please reach out. I think the point I really want to make is that you are not alone. In this article, almost 2/3 of people are feeling exactly the way you're feeling. Do not feel that you can't reach out to people that help you. And this is a real shout out to the counseling services of colleges that I think they've beefed up. But if you have not colleges, please do realize how serious this is, and that unfortunately, Mark, this is manifesting in suicides and manifesting in suicide attempts. And Mark, how many kids that we know leave college the first year? And I don't think my daughter would mind me sharing that, this was a struggle for her in her first year. And I remember a couple times having dinner with my daughter. She reached out, and I remember driving down because I was working in Connecticut several times just to have lunch with my daughter and see her through some tough times because, they go to college. It is such a dramatic transition emotionally not to feel that connection with family or with pets or with community. And all of a sudden, they're all out there on their own, especially in the time of COVID. So I just want to make a personal plea to, if anybody's feeling depressed or lonely, please reach out to your counselor, to your family. Don't get it to the point where you feel that there is no hope, because there are people willing to help you. So.
No, thanks for sharing that, Dave. Very important. Now, the last thing I want to say is a huge announcement happened yesterday that CDC came out and said if you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to wear masks indoors.
Yes.
And so we're all excited after 14 months, we're jumping for joy here, some normalcy. And so I'm anticipating it not being the way it was this last year with everybody on Zoom all the time. But stuff that Dave and I talked about, it still applies to you transitioning to a new college campus, whether it's Zoom or not. These were all social connection strategies, tactics, communities that we talked about. And so I don't want anybody thinking, well, we're kind of moving out of the pandemic, so I don't know if this is that relevant to me anymore. Yes, it is.
Right. Hey, I know what last thing I would say is that, when I went to college, my parents took upon themselves to help me find a local church, which I didn't really like. but the point is,
that sounds like something Uncle Eldon would do.
Exactly. I said, Dad, it's got to actually have singing. but the fact is, as parents, one of the things that we might do is help the kids transition. If you are a part of a religious or ethnic minority, to find some communities within that setting. If your child is involved in certain type of activities, to maybe make the link up with the child so that he's coming in with some type of at least referrals for support groups that could help. He or she.
But the only thing I want to say is you have to know your family dynamics. So they're like Lauren, Dave can crack the whip on Lauren and she does what he says. Like there are a lot of students that will defy whatever their parent tells them. And so you sort of have to know the dynamic of your child and whether or not you doing that is going to just turn them off. So that's case by case.
That's true.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners. Okay, friends, I'm giving you a warning right now. Get used to me calling Lisa Anika because I just did it 20 seconds ago. Just giving everybody a warning. I've got 25 and 22-year-old daughters. Those of you regular listeners know. And ask Karis how many times she gets called Joy and Joy how many times she gets Karis. Sometimes I fumble back and forth. I'm like, get it together, dude.
Well,
so this is going to happen.
I'm happy to be called Anika. I think it's an honor. I admire her tremendously. So that works for me.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for the grace. Okay, Lisa, as you know, I've been doing this countdown like forever. Well, there's 18 schools, so that's more than a third of a year. That's you times 18. So now I'm starting to get itchy. We're getting down to the end, but I want to get it over with. So I'm not going to count down the whole 18, but I will do the top 10. So far, we've done UPenn. These are schools that have 6 CEOs currently. That graduated undergraduate from their school. So we had UPenn, Cal Berkeley, Texas A&M, and Purdue, all tied with 6. Then we cracked the top 5. We have Stanford with 7, which we rolled out a few weeks ago. Michigan in 4th with 8. So now we're in the top 3. So now I'm getting excited again. So in 3rd place, now we're into double-digit CEOs.
Ooh.
Yeah, in 3rd place with 10 CEOs, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York.
That's amazing. I mean, it's a great business school, so.
And it's a school. Yeah, by the way, that school was brutal to get in this year. Dyson, when they went test blind, I saw their admit rate 3 point something, and regular, just
Oh,
brutal.
my goodness.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a great school. So 2 more to go.
All right. Awesome.
All right. This question that we're about to read, it is a great question, but it's lengthy and multifaceted. In fact, it's so lengthy that we're going to break it up. I'm going to read the first half, and then I'll have Lisa read the second half. But it's a great question. So starts out, says, "Hi, Mark. Just want to say I'm a huge fan of yours. I love the insights and advice you give. Thanks for doing what you do, and please continue the podcast even after you get at the end of the book." Well, we're obviously doing that because this is episode 173. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for your kind words, Elizabeth. Also, want to mention that the new partner you have on the show, I forgot her name, so she's forgetting your name too. But she did a deep dive on University of Chicago. She's great! ! Lots of knowledge. Keep her around.
Aw.
So, Elizabeth, we're following the script. She's a regular now. That's also I had to read, by the way. I couldn't have Lisa read that. She would be blushing over there. She would revolt and quit. Then she says, "A little about me. I'm a mom of 2 kids, 10th and 8th graders in the Bay Area, California. Kids go to large, highly competitive public schools. My day job is a school librarian. I love LOV, capital L, capital O, capital VE. Love to research colleges." And as you know, librarians love to research, just in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love to research colleges, and I'm trying super hard to not take over the process for my 10th grader. You and all of us here who are all listening, that's something that we all struggle with as parents, taking over the process, so a lot of people can relate. Then she says, "My daughter is interested in attending a small liberal arts college. We will not qualify for any aid from the FAFSA," which, by the way, I find that very common in California because the real estate's gone up so much that it's just knocking people out just off the asset piece. So it's very common for California families that I work with to not qualify, or certainly not qualify for what they need to be able to pay. Anyway, however, living in the Bay Area and not being extremely wealthy, it would be tight financially to pay $70,000 per year for a school that doesn't offer merit. But we could do it. Anna has high stats, over 4.0, will take 2 dual enrollment courses by the end of the summer, is in marching band, high-level swimming, dance, officer in 2 clubs. She's going to be a lifeguard this summer. After listening to you and reading and learning a lot, I'm aware that all of this means very little, and that to get into one of her top choices, like a Vassar or Hamilton, will be a crapshoot. She might get in, but she very well may not get in. All right, Lisa, why don't you take over? Because my voice is getting tiring, I'm sure.
So Elizabeth says, "My question is, what do you think about the quality and calibers of schools like Willamette, Lewis and Clark, Occidental, and the University of Puget Sound for somebody like Anna? She's not cutthroat or uber competitive about academics. She enjoys learning, works well in a group setting, and tends to be a perfectionist in whatever she does. She is identified as gifted and talented, but also tends to procrastinate and likes having free time to lie in her bed and read and make TikToks about the books she reads. In my online research, I'm able to find so much wonderful feedback about the quality of an experience that you will get if you attend Vassar or Franklin and Marshall or Bates or Bowdoin. The sense of community in the student body sounds ideal. On the other hand, when you look for reviews of the West Coast LACs, there's not a lot of talk about them either way. Of course, everyone raves about the Claremont colleges, but acceptance to those would be unlikely, so I've kind of crossed them off our list. Why is no one talking about Occidental or Willamette? It seems like the online comments are, they're all right. I wonder what the difference in experience between a Bates, Franklin and Marshall, McAllister, Vassar, or Hamilton would be versus an LAC where she could possibly get some merit aid, like Denison, Lewis and Clark, Willamette, University of Puget Sound, Whitman, Muhlenberg, Dickinson. Are they comparable? Will she find super bright, motivated, engaged students at these schools? Maybe the answer to this question will become clearer when we are actually able to visit these campuses and feel the vibe of the students for ourselves. But I am wondering if you have any general advice about families who can afford, but for whom it would be a sacrifice to pay full price. Is it worth it, in your opinion, to pay full price for these brand name LACs? I just don't want to counsel her to go for the less prestigious school and then have her feel like she's not being challenged by her peers to grow and think and stretch. Don't know if this is a discussion point that would be interesting on your podcast or not. Just thought I'd mention it because it's the main thing I wrestle with. Thanks again, Mark, for all you do. Hope your shoulder PT is going well. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Wow, great question. And I say, most of the time when I say great question, I say it because from my experience, I know that the question relates to a large swath of our listenership. There's a lot of people out there having this question. I had a conversation like this with someone from Texas 2 days ago. So I know how common this is. So the first thing I want to say is I'm not going to get into saying this is good for Anna or this is not, because I don't know Anna well enough to do that. And the description was great, but it's not good enough for me to say, oh, this school would be perfect for you, Anna, or this school wouldn't be. But I can certainly speak in vague generalities. So I want to start with a little brief story. This is a family. You're going to know who I'm talking about, Lisa. But I had a conversation with a family last week, actually. And they're having a really hard time trying to decide between Emerson for communications and Miami for their school of communications. And I do a lot of sessions like right before May 1st. And people are like, Mark, which one? And I'm not going to tell them. I'll let them sort of figure it out and I'll give them some pointers. But I'm like a sounding board and pointing some things out. So one of the questions they said, Mark, what school's more prestigious, Emerson or Miami? And I said to them, what I'm now saying to all of you is there's something called local prestige, and it's real. And so if you are in Miami, you're going to be familiar with Miami School of Communication. If you're in the Boston area, then you're going to know more about Emerson. And that's the way it applies oftentimes to these schools. I guarantee you that if you're in the Pacific Northwest, I guarantee you people are more familiar with Puget Sound, Lewis and Clark, Whitman, Willamette than they know about F&M and Bates and Colby. So some of that is regional. And I hold these schools in very high regard that you mentioned. In fact, we've done, I think, 73, 74 college spotlights. And we've already done one on Puget Sound, Whitman, and Oxy. And that's because I love those schools. And I'm trying to bring some attention to those schools that I think are underrated gems. So those are fantastic schools I hold in really high regard. There is also something known as East Coast bias. There is a bias on the East Coast, and it's not just academic bias. I mean, anybody who follows basketball like I do, you could have an amazing West Coast team and they completely fly under the radar, by the national media. And it has a lot to do with major media networks being on the East Coast time zones versus West Coast time zones, and, what times games are shown. Well, that also tends to carry over to schools. There tends to be a bias toward the East Coast. And it just is what it is. There's a perception that, well, all the great schools are on the East Coast. And Lisa, why don't you talk about what you and I have said about the Midwest in this regard, how it gets dissed a lot.
Yeah, that's the story of my life, really. Even, non-college related things, I would go visit my family in Washington, D.C., and they would just refer to Chicago like it was some Rube Hick town. And I'd be like, this is the third largest city in the United States, right? It's just they couldn't get that in their mind because it was in the Midwest. And I think there's a lot of really amazing Midwest schools that just don't get on the radar of people in the East Coast. And they would otherwise really love them if they, know about them and learn more about them. But it just seems like it's like kind of a part of the country that doesn't exist.
I agree 100%. And I would say it's not only the Midwest. It applies to really every part of the country other than the East. It applies, definitely applies to the Pacific Northwest. It applies to Texas. It applies to the Southeast. And so just to be aware, there's a bias in there. And if you're not going to live in that region, you won't experience it as much. Now, another thing I want to say, and this is really important, when you're looking at liberal arts and science colleges, you really need to be going to them more for the caliber of the experience, for the small classes, the close-knit faculty, for the way they train your mind to be a critical thinker, an effective writer, verbal communicator. If you're primarily interested in name recognition, you're going to be disappointed with all of them. So I would argue the most prestigious liberal arts and science colleges would be Williams and Amherst if I had to pick two. Certainly others that would be in the conversation with, that would belong in that conversation, but I'll just stick with those two for a sec. 90% of the population has not heard of these schools. They just haven't. Like our listenership has, because we have a certain kind of listenership. You're choosing to listen to a college admission podcast that goes over an hour and a half. So it's a certain kind of hardcore listenership. But that's not the majority of the population. Just walk out on the street and say, have you heard of Williams College? Have you heard of Amherst College? And see what happens. Try it with Swarthmore College, Pomona, some of the biggest brand names in the country. People just haven't heard of them. Elizabeth, you have, because you're a librarian and a researcher, but the most of the country has not. And so for any liberal arts and science school, you need to be comfortable with that. I'll tell you a brief story. I was at a conference in 2002, educational conference in San Antonio, admissions conference, and was at a really expensive hotel, and I always tried to save my institution money. So when they would say, do you want to pair up with a roommate or go single? I was like, I just can't justify $500 a night for a room. So I would always, say, yeah, give me a roommate. So they signed me a roommate. It's obviously another admissions person. And we got into this long conversation, and he was a graduate of Bates. And he said to this day, it pisses him off. He says, because I busted my butt at Bates while my friends went to State U and were just partying like crazy. And I'll go around and people will say, where'd you go to college? And I'll say Bates, and they'll say, is that a community college? And so you have to be comfortable with that for any liberal arts and science school. But, it's just something that you just have to work through. I experienced it with my two daughters. One went to Davidson, one went to University of Georgia. University of Georgia, big football, sports, everybody's heard of it. Davidson, a lot of people haven't. Most haven't. And so, but my daughter, Karis, she feels like UGA was perfect for Joy. But for me, it was too big. I want to have 15 and 18 in my class and know my professors really, really well. And I have this question I have on my questionnaire that I use for all the students I work with. And I love this question. And I ask it, I say, well, are you comfortable going to a school that employers and grad schools respect, but the average person on the streets haven't heard of it? And it's a really revealing question. And if people say, no, I don't want that, then you're probably not going to be happy at any liberal arts and science school. And that's just something to think about. And so I think your sense, Elizabeth, is that all these other East Coast schools are household names. I'm telling you, people have not heard of them. And so now let's talk about, is it worth it? Well, I don't know enough about your financial situation to give you, specific advice overall. When it comes to money, $50,000 to one person is like $500,000 to another, and $5,000 to another, and $5 to another. So just everything's all relative. But the fact that you indicated it would be a strain is enough already for me to strongly indicate that based on what I know from what you're saying, I would be looking at value. And I would be looking at where you can go and get that merit money and not strain, because most people don't have one kid, they have two. What you do for one, you want to do for both, or they have three like Lisa or Anika, And then nowadays, the undergrad degree is almost like the high school diploma. You're probably looking at grad school or professional school. So I was talking to somebody a while ago. Somebody was actually looking at hiring me, and they never actually ended up doing it, but we had a conversation initially. And this was a wealthy person from Los Angeles. And he was like, if I work with you, can you guarantee my kid will get in a top 50 school? And I was like, no. And then he said, well, if my kid can't get in a top 50 school, I'm not going to pay $500,000. And then I said, well, it's not going to be $500,000. I said, the most expensive schools are like 82, which is a lot. But, I said, you times it by 4 and you're looking at 330. He said, it's $500,000 when I take taxes into consideration. And he was 100% right. So it's a big deal to spend $500,000. Some of the schools you mentioned, Elizabeth, don't give merit money. Vassar's not a merit money school. Hamilton's not a merit money school. Most of the schools in New England and in the Mid-Atlantic, the most selective ones, the culture is not to give merit money. It's sort of, because the Ivies don't give merit money, that's sort of spiraled out and it's permeated the NESCAC conference and lots of other schools, in the Mid-Atlantic in New England, such as Haverford College, Swarthmore College, Georgetown, Tufts, and I could go on and on. So those are not the places to get merit money. And the value that I feel you would get at the schools you've mentioned and others, from what you've told me, to me, it's a no-brainer. But that's because I hold those schools in very, very high regard. And I think you'd be very pleased with the caliber of the education that you get. Now, you will find sometimes, rankings are so much based on selectivity. And some of the schools you mentioned aren't as selective as some of the others. And so they may not appear quite as high in the rankings. But you can get a wonderful education in all of those places. They're all every single one of the schools that you mentioned is fantastic.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, excited to have Vince Garcia back for the second time. And Vince reached out to me and said, Mark, crazy stuff's going on with the UCs. Why don't we do another interview? I think the audience would love it. And I said, let's do it, Vince. And so that's what we're doing. We're looking at the 10 UCs. And when I say UCs, that's just short for the University of California. And if you want to know what schools I'm talking about, It's UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Irvine, UCLA, UC Merced, UC Riverside, UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, UC Santa Cruz. Those are the 9 undergraduate schools. And then there's one school, UC San Francisco, that exclusively has grad courses. So that's why there's really 10 UCs, but sometimes you'll see 9, 10, what's going on? Well, there's 9 undergraduate, 10 overall. So in part 1, Vince gives his backstory again, in case you never heard when he was on the last time. We talk about how rigor matters in the UCs, and we talk about some ways in which it's evaluated. And then we talk about the growth of the applications. Where did they come from? Are they in-state or are they mostly out-of-state? Listen and enjoy. Friends, we are in for a treat. We have Vince Garcia back a second time, and you don't get back a second time on your college-bound kid unless the first time was a bang. So thrilled to have Vince back. Vince, briefly, why don't you share? You've done college admissions at 3 schools in California, and then you've been a seasonal reader at a couple others. Just give a quick rehash of your background to refresh our listeners, especially some who might not have heard your first interview.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Mark. It's such a great podcast, and I learn something every week. And I just I find myself on the treadmill when I'm trying to get my 10,000 steps list. That's when I do it, And now I have a tray, so I can actually do multiple things. But I'll probably take the tray down when I'm listening, because sometimes I miss something if I've walked too much. So my college admissions experience has been at Pomona College and Occidental and Cal Lutheran. And then I worked as the scholarship coordinator at the Point Foundation, which gives scholarships for LGBT students. And I am a reader currently for the Schwartzman Scholars, which is a graduate program in China, very prestigious, increasingly become so. I also read for Technovation, which is a you make a pitch, a group of young women make a pitch video and sell a business idea. It's a great competition. And I've also read applications for UCLA and Berkeley and San Diego.
Oh, 3 schools. I short shrift you there with 2. Well, just friends, Vince is someone who's kind of almost partnered with us right from the start. He just reached out and said, listen, I've been in the game 30 years and I learned something from every episode. I want to support you guys in whatever way I can. And we've sort of struck a friendship up, and he's got such expertise in California. He went to Oxy, graduated from Oxy, and then literally having all 6 of those schools were all California schools. And so when we want California expertise, Vince is a guy that I call on, and California happens to be almost triple the size of our next largest state as far as our listenership. And even still, California is an extremely popular destination anywhere you go in the country. We've got six UC schools getting over 100,000 applications. And so this is a unique year. And Vince reached out to me. He said, Mark, this is a crazy year with UCs and CSUs. Why don't we do a podcast? And I was like, let's do it, Vince. And so that's why we're here today. We want to talk about some of the changes, trends, what we're seeing, what he's seen amongst the UCs and CSUs. And before we kick it off, I just want to read a quote from an excellent article that many of you may have read. Vince sent it to me from the LA Times. And the title is UC Explains Admissions Decisions in a Record Application Year of Much Heartbreak and Some Joy. So I just want to read this one quote, and I think that'll kick off a little bit of a discussion. So it profiles a student, a 4.3 GPA student with 8 APs and honors courses, a host of extracurriculars, said, you know what, I'm applying to 7 UCs, and it says she was floored in March when campus notifications rolled out. Of the 7 UCs, her daughter, this is talking to the mom, was denied or waitlisted at all but Merced. So, and then it goes on to say, it was heartbreaking, said the parent who asked for anonymity to protect her daughter's privacy at the time of great disappointment. And I got really angry. We just got the rug pulled out from under us. What more could our kids possibly have done? And then the last line, and then I'll let you say whatever you want to say, Vince. That's the question thousands of families and high school seniors are asking themselves in a college admission season like no other. So thought that would be a good quote to kick it off. take it where you want to go, Vince. You want to talk about this year and give a high view overview?
Sure. So I think the thing that's important to say is that when you apply to the University of California, they all use a holistic admissions process, and every application is reviewed twice. And there are now 12 points that they cover. Testing used to be a part of the process, but they're test blind. So even if you sent test scores, the one question I have, and I probably should have asked this before our meeting, when they were test blind, I wondered what that meant regarding other tests, like subject tests, if you've gotten those in, AP test, IB scores, if you happen to have those this early. But I know for SAT and ACT, they're test blind. So they look at the whole thing.
So Vince, let me just make a quick comment. Everybody I know that I've interacted with now has not applied that to APs. That has not been applied to APs at all. And of course, the subject tests are now obsolete. But for those who got them in, I think they were seen. But for SAT ones and ACTs, and we did have Lisa Prescott on the podcast. You might have heard that. She's been at Santa Barbara for 36 years. So we got to talk with her. We had her on right at the time they were trying to decide if they were intentionally going to be test blind because of how seeing that score biases you. And then the decision kind of came down to go test blind. So just wanted to chime that in.
Yeah, and I would say that that's probably purposeful, because I know that at the University of California, one of the things they want to make sure is that their graduation rates, they would love most of their campus to finish in 4 years, but because of the impact and number of students that are admitted to the University of California, it's probably 4.5 or 5. And sometimes 6. So you have to be cognizant of that when you're thinking about it. But I think that, so the more AP or community college courses you bring, it raises your course count and it raises your rigor. And I think one of the biggest things that I saw was there was a intense focus, not that it wasn't there before, but it's probably even more so at looking at what's available. And they have, all the UCs have three or more years of information regarding students who've applied from their high school, students who were admitted, and then students who came. So what was the number of honors and AP courses those students took? And they spent a lot of time looking at your plan of study and how you persevered through that plan of study. So you might have a student who was from Lompoc, which is kind of a smaller part of California, and they offer no honors or APs, but there's a local community college nearby. And for a student who may have taken, 1 or 2 and had a perfect GPA, they might be more appealing than somebody who came from Palo Alto High School, where there's 26 APs, and you only took 2. So they're really looking at course count. The other thing that was really interesting about this particular article, and they then referenced an example of a young woman who goes to a really competitive high school, San Marino High School, and she was surprised that she was admitted to Irvine. And she had friends that in her mind, and maybe she saw their applications, their course count and curriculum and rigor was stronger, and maybe their activities were a little bit more strong as well. But they all applied. The impression was they all applied in psychology, and the director of admission for UC Irvine had said almost 70% of the applicant pool. So over 113,000 applications to Irvine, they applied. They have six majors: psychology, computer science, biology, economics, business. So if you were in that group, you had to show demonstration. And she applied, I think she said, undecided humanities. And it was funny because they kind of tried to backpedal it a little bit. He said, you can't, it's hard to change your major when you get there. But I've always said to my students, if you're applying to a major that's in arts and sciences, it's not going to be difficult to move from sociology to psychology if it's in the same school. Now, it's going to be more difficult to move from psychology to the engineering school, but usually those two things don't intersect. So the biggest outcome, I think, this year, especially at the more selective options, was intense scrutiny on your transcript and your grades in 10 and 11 and what rigor you pursued 10, 11, and then they looked at 12 as well.
And do you feel they didn't do that previous years, or it was just greater scrutiny this year, you know?
Greater scrutiny because you don't have the test scores. So the biggest test or biggest case you can make about how you're going to perform freshman and sophomore year are your grades and the rigor in which you achieve those grades.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 173 is the Character Collaborative. The Character Collaborative. Now, the goal of the collaborative is to change the way admissions is done right now, both in secondary school and in higher ed. And it's to reflect character strengths more and to utilize character evaluation more in the evaluation of an applicant. And there are 74 organizations that are part of the Character Collaborative, and there are 200 active participants. And so if you're interested in seeing their latest research, seeing reports, they've even launched a couple courses that you can sign up and take, and you want to stay on the cutting edge of attempts by some significant leaders in the world of secondary ed and higher ed to change how admissions is actually done, then I highly encourage you to check out the Character Collaborative. Now, the website is just character-admission.org, character-admission.org, and it's a recommended resource for episode 173. We'll now return to my interview with Vince Garcia. So let me ask you something, because, for example, when Lisa was on, talking about 12th grade grades, she indicated that we really look at the courses you're taking in 12th, but we're not looking at the grades. If you've done really well in 10th and 11th, we're going to expect you to do well. And she actually used the term, we'll cancel you if once we see your final transcript, there's a significant drop off. But there really wasn't, with 100,000 apps, time to evaluate 12th grade grades in the evaluation process. Are you saying that you think there was a shift to include that this year?
There definitely was not, because again, the timeline, because some of the, not only did they extend the deadline to December, but two of the campuses extended to December 15th and one all the way into January. So there would not be enough time.
Right.
Berkeley has in the past asked for semester grades for a student that has gone beyond the first two reads and they want more information. And they've also asked for recommendations. So Berkeley, I'm sure, continued that process. And I think for the other UCs, there wouldn't be the time to turn that information around. But I would say that one of the places it seemed that they placed a lot of emphasis from the article was on your math curriculum. So if you took calculus as a junior, there is an expectation, if BC was offered, that you would rise to that level instead of just taking stats. And that might be one way that you could sort of distinguish the student with the most rigorous curriculum versus the curriculum that you took.
Yeah, and another really interesting thing is that the domestic non-resident apps were way up, like 44%.
Yes.
What's your theory on that?
Well, it was really interesting because with my own families, there was a lot of chatter about that students who were coming from less rigorous high schools, whether they be public or private, was going to be that they were going to create more space for underrepresented students. And I have to remind people that here in California, affirmative action was up again in November, and that initiative did not pass. So they don't look at gender or race in the decision process. But what it did do was when the UC came out really early in the spring and said, we're going to be test optional, and then they became test blind because of the law case, that really, there were all these students from all over the country thought maybe this is my chance to get to sunny California. And one of the things that's really been underreported, and it's not really mentioned in the LA Times article either, is that most of the increase in applications came from students out of state.
Yeah.
I wondered what the diversity was of that group, and if a lot of the students that were thinking about California, the test part, which proved for highly selective colleges, you saw all of their application numbers skyrocket. And here in California, it made a big difference. I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind as well, though, when you look at the amount of aid that the UC provides its students, it's not particularly generous for out-of-state students. So there was a young person that I supported through a program who wants to become a vet. And Davis has a great, setup, and they have animal sciences, and it kind of sets you up for the next rung. But when she was admitted, the package wasn't even close to what she could get from her home state. So I always tell students, just because something is test optional, you got to do the other part of the equation, which is, do they offer good aid? And if they don't, then you want to focus on schools, especially if money is important in the process, to really think about that. Because it can be hard to say to people, oh, I got into UCLA and Berkeley, but I can't even look because I've just realized I'm not getting much financial support.
So, I was on a presentation, and I'm not going to mention which of the UC schools it was, but I'll just say it was one of them, and it was to College Greenlight, and that's the division of CapEx that focuses on CBOs. Mm-hmm. And so you had, they support, and we've had them on the podcast before. Last I knew, over 1,400 CBOs. So you have these CBOs, community-based organizations, oftentimes work with under-resourced students, and they're pitching the UC school really strong. And I asked the really tough questions about aid. And fortunately, the VP of enrollment, just came out and admitted it, said, no, we're just not strong in that area. But that is something that you want to be mindful of. Not only are the schools not good for aid, there's some of the more expensive public schools in the country. Mm-hmm. You get some public schools sometimes, even some public flagships, that, like, for example, there's a big difference in the price tag of an Arizona versus a UC.
Yes.
You're probably talking at least $20,000.
And if you look at Ohio State, that is a really affordable public opportunity for out-of-state students. And I would venture to guess that many Californians will start to shift their focus from Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, because it's really affordable. And in some ways, it's only about $12,000 more than you would pay going to a UC school if you were in-state.
Yeah, because the UC seem to be pretty generous for need-based aid for the most under-resourced, right?
Yes.
But if you're not in that under-resourced and you're in-state and you're going to a UC, you're still with room and board and non-billable fees and tuition. Are you north of 35?
Yeah.
Yeah. I figured 35 to 40. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
In-state. Yeah.
So what I would ask people to really consider is, if you're thinking that, test blind is attractive, just make sure that you also are aware of the financial resources of the institutions that you're applying to, whether they be the University of California, CSU, or private institutions. Because again, you could have all these options, but if you can't afford them, then you're stuck with limited options.
Where's California now with, because I get it confused. There's like 18% and 25%, something like, don't they have the whole system? They can only take 18% out of state, but some individual schools can go as high as 25%. Is that correct?
So what happens, and in this part, I'm not sure how they manage it, because the state legislature has said we only want 18% of the students, any freshman class overall in the UC system to be made up of students coming from out of state, and that includes international students. And I think the way that they make up for it is some campuses have more international and domestic applicants apply. There are very few students from Ohio applying to UC Riverside, but the number that applying to maybe Santa Barbara or San Diego, where the ocean is right there, is going to be greater. So ultimately, they figured out the yield rates at the schools where they're getting an abundance of out-of-state applications and figured out how to get below 18%.
So I'm right on that 18. Is it also true that no campus can go over 25 out of state? Is that because I'd heard that, and I can't remember if that was folklore or if that was like a credible. I felt like it was a credible source, but I don't remember reading it. I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
What I saw when I was looking at, for instance, UCLA, it was as high 2 years ago as 30% were admitted from out of state, and that included international and out of state applicants. But when you looked at, Merced or Riverside, the numbers were so small. Ultimately, the average for the UC system fell below 18%. So I don't think that I would say that you probably couldn't go above 30% of your admits out of state. And if more of the less selective UCs started to increase their numbers, you would probably see UCLA, Berkeley, San Diego, Irvine, Santa Barbara start to also pull back so they could keep the number under 18%.
So let's do this, because I know you're friends with Gary Clark at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you check with him on that? And I'll also check with Lisa.
Okay.
And if we get anything that's different than it, if there is a cap on an individual school, then I'll make sure that we insert that into this record.
Okay.
And so I just want to make sure we're really accurate on that.
Yeah.
After following up, we both learned that UCLA has a cap on its out-of-state students, and that cap is 22%, not 18% or 25%. Now, here's what's interesting. They can admit significantly more than this 22%, but the out-of-state matriculation, in other words, those who enroll, must be no more than 22%. So they're always running their yield numbers to see if they can take more out-of-state students and stay under this 22%. Remember, students closer to home for pretty much almost all schools will yield at a higher rate. So out-of-state yield will be lower than in-state yield. Now, Gary Clark from UCLA will be on our podcast. So I'm going to ask him when I interview him, is there a cap on the percentage of out-of-state students that they actually admit? Now it's time for our college spotlight of the week. Okay, here we go. Our college spotlight is North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina. With close to 13,000 students, North Carolina A&T is quickly growing. And since 2014, it has become the largest HBCU in the country. And the university has a goal to grow its population to 15,000 students by 2028. It has already more than doubled since 1999 when it was at 6,000. And for those who are wondering what HBCU is, Dave, I'm taking a big gamble here. Can you tell our listeners what HBCU stands for?
Historically Black College and Universities.
Doing his homework over there between episodes. I'm just having some fun with my man over here.
That's right. That's right.
And HBCUs, and I'm going to become a little bit of a history teacher more than a college coach in this episode, Dave. I'm going to do a deep dive into the history of a lot of the HBCUs and explain something that explains a lot of the history of a lot of our colleges that have emerged since the Civil War later on. But originally, they were birthed out of segregation. There was no opportunity for Black folks to attend what we call PWIs, predominantly white institutions. But over time, and become a lot more than that. Students often feel they are celebrated and not just tolerated. They feel like the faculty understands them, and there's a confidence-inspiring aspect that a lot of alums swear by, and they say it's nice to go to a place that feels like home and feels like you're not an outsider. And they're not exclusively just for Black students. In fact, a lot of them even have scholarships for diversity for people of other races and other ethnicities. One of my daughters, both my daughters are good friends with someone named Olivia out of the Raleigh area, and she is determined to go to North Carolina Central for her law degree, which is another HBCU in North Carolina, and she's Caucasian. So they are open to all races. Sometimes people don't understand that, and they ask, like, if you're not Black, are you allowed to go? So just want to clear up that if there's any misgivings there. All right, Dave, North Carolina A&T is a mouthful.
Yeah.
And so for the rest of the spotlight, I will refer to it by its 3 very common nicknames. Do you want to take a guess what any of those 3 common nicknames are?
Well, one I know is the Aggies.
Yes, as Anika busted on you.
That's
How
right.
you
the
know that.
Aggies.
Yep. That's the official nickname, by the way.
Right.
Is the others are more just, slang that we refer to all the time. Any idea what the other? See if you can get 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Well, I know it ain't AT&T.
No, it's not that, but that was close.
How about A&T?
There you go. There you go.
A&T.
2 out of 3. And the third is NCAT. So you'll hear it referred as NCAT, A&T, and the Aggies. Awesome. And this is a special tribute to Anika. Anika went there. She met her husband, Javon, there. And while her oldest son went to Davidson, along with Karis, her second daughter, Janaea, is there now having the time of her life. A&T has over 70,000 alumni, and it is regarded by most as the #1 public HBCU in the country. In fact, Florida A&M, FAMU would be the only other one if there was a national vote that would garner substantial votes. So those two clearly have sort of distinguished themselves reputation-wise as the top public HBCUs in the country. Now, I've got a personal connection to this school because Joy was in New Orleans for a basketball tournament in the 6th grade, and she really blew up. She had a monster tournament, and then all that college recruitment mail started. Dave, that's when I knew this thing was real. 6th grade, and your mailbox is getting blown up.
Wow.
But the 2 schools that were sending the most mail were Virginia Tech and North Carolina A&T. And so A&T became her first official recruitment visit. And they did the whole roll out the red carpet. We spent almost a full day there, getting the spiel and meeting the nutrition people and the weightlifting people and this coach and that coach. And then you do the meal. And then they show you the absolute amazing dorm that the basketball team stays in. And then we went and they give you tickets for a game at night. So I was on the campus for a good 6 to 8 hours. That was a great experience. We're doing back-to-back weeks, Dave, of schools that are primarily STEM schools, science, technology, engineering, and math. Last week was Clemson, known for its very strong engineering, along with business management and some other majors. And A&T would be the exact same thing. Known primarily for its engineering, but very, very strong in a number of other majors, and we'll get to that a little more in a few. Now, in order to understand A&T, this is where I attempt to become the history teacher, Dave, so we'll see if I flop.
Going back to 1891.
Oh, I'm going back before that. In order to understand A&T, it is very helpful to understand the Morrill Act. The Morrill Act and how it birthed so many great institutions in this country today. So before the Civil War, American colleges almost exclusively trained students in classical studies and the liberal arts. Education was primarily for the wealthy. And in order to be admitted to the few schools that existed, it was quite common that the universities required proficiency in Greek and Latin, which I might add was an intentional way of excluding the working classes. And during this time, American engineers primarily got educated through the U.S. military academy. There were very, very few engineers in the country. Fortunately, a humanitarian and a visionary named Justin Smith Morrill, a very young senator from the state of Vermont, he had a vision for Americans to have access to higher education. And not just those coming from nobility and the aristocracy. So in 1862, the first Morrill Act passed and it got through Congress and it got implemented during the Civil War. And remember, this is a time when the nation is dominated by the agricultural economy. So what was the purpose of the Morrill Act? It was to teach such areas of learning related to agriculture, which was the predominant economy, and what they called in that day mechanic arts. Like, what's mechanic arts? What are you talking about? Well, mechanic arts was what we refer to now as practical engineering. It was engineering for the industrial classes that applied to many pursuits and professions in life. So let's take a look at the number of engineers. The number of engineers prior to the Morrill Act, guess how many there were, Dave, for the whole country prior to the Morrill Act?
1,000.
300. Pretty good guess.
Wow.
300 in the country. That was it. And they basically graduated from 6 colleges. 4 years later, 21 colleges were offering engineering degrees, and the total number of engineers tripled to 866. The following decade, another 2,249 engineers, and by 1911, the U.S. was graduating 3,000 engineers a year, with a total of 38,000 in the workforce. At that time, Germany was graduating 1,800 engineers. So the U.S. became the leader in technical education just 50 years after passing the Morrill Act. Now, under the act, each eligible state received 30,000 acres of federal land, either within its own boundaries or in its contiguous boundaries, for each member of Congress that the state had, based on the 1860 census. And so this land, or the proceeds from its sale, was used to establish funding some of the leading educational institutions in the country this day. In fact, when you go back and look, you'll see so many universities were founded in the 1860s and the 1870s based on the Morrill Act. Now, the one tragic component of the Morrill Act is the U.S. used federal lands that they really took from tribal or indigenous communities. So that's the one downside. And after the war, the Morrill Act was extended to the Confederate states. So some of you are probably thinking, Stuck, can you name some of these land grant colleges for me? It will just kind of help me get a handle on it. Well, I'm just going to name a sampling of colleges that got started based on the Morrill Act. University of Connecticut, University of California, Berkeley, University of Arizona, Colorado State, University of Illinois, Michigan State University, Ohio State University, Purdue, University of Florida, Iowa State, University of Kentucky, Louisiana State, University of Maryland, University of Minnesota, UMass Amherst, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, Cornell, North Carolina State, Penn State, Oregon, Clemson, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Wisconsin, Madison, Washington State. That's a mouthful, Dave, wasn't it?
That is. That certainly is.
All of those schools founded by the Morrill Act to basically train the common man in agriculture, practical engineering, and other crafts as well. But a controversy emerged in 1890. What do we do about the colored people? Now, I'm sorry, I'm not going retro, Dave. That was the term in that day. You know that, NAACP, Nationalization of Colored People, right?
Well, we've come full circle. We're back to BIPOC.
Yeah, we're back to BIPOC. That's right. You got it. So what happened was a second Morrill Act passed in 1890. It was aimed at the former Confederate states. And this act required each state to show that race was not an admissions criterion for their land grant college. You heard the term land grant college, and this is colleges that were granted land by the federal government based on the Morrill Act. So the 1890 Act, you either had to integrate your land grant college or designate a separate land grant institution for people of color. And what do you think most people did, Dave? Integrate or establish your own separate?
Well, knowing that down the road we got separate but equal, I'd have to say we went the separate but equal route.
Exactly. And this is what led to the birth of so many of the HBCUs. They got formed out of the 1890 version of the Morrill Act, requiring education for people of color, either integrate your land grant or establish your own. So let's give case in point. North Carolina State had been established by the first Morrill Act, but they didn't want to integrate. So 1 year after the second Morrill Act Pact, 1890, in 1891, NCAT was birthed. It was the second Morrill Act College in 1891. And dozens of other HBCUs were formed under this second Morrill Act. There's 101 HBCUs, and of the 101 HBCUs, more than a couple dozen were formed. Who are we talking about? Just to name a few: Alabama A&M, Alcorn State, Central State, Delaware State, FAMU, Florida A&M, Fort Valley State, Kentucky State, Langston University, Lincoln University, North Carolina A&T, Prairie View, South Carolina State, Southern, Tennessee State, Tuskegee University, Arkansas Pine Bluff, Maryland Eastern Shore, Virginia State, West Virginia State. So there's just a handful. And notice they're not all in the South, Dave. Lincoln's in Pennsylvania, Central State's in Ohio. So they're not only Southern. So there we go. Now, originally, North Carolina A&T, founded by the North Carolina General Assembly. Now, this is a mouthful. Get ready for this name. It was the Agricultural and Mechanical College for the Colored Race. That's what it was called. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Dave?
Say that again. The Agricultural and Mechanical
Man, you're killing
College.
me. That's like a tongue twister. Agricultural and Mechanical College for the Colored Race.
AMCCR. Yeah.
But the name was changed. The name was changed to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State. And this is where the A&T comes from. Agricultural and Technical State. But that was still a mouthful. So then it got changed to North Carolina A&T State University.
Yeah.
But most people feel that's still too long. So then they just call it North Carolina A&T or NCAT or A&T.
That's right. I like the Aggies.
There you go. The Aggies. Mascot quiz time. So their mascot is an Aggie. So the question for you is, what's an Aggie?
Their mascot is a cute little bulldog.
You got it. It is a type of bulldog. I can't catch you on mascots, no matter how hard I try.
I know my mascots.
You really do. Okay. A&T is a public, historically black land-grant research institution in Greensboro, and it is part of the University of North Carolina system. As I mentioned, the second school to be established under the Second Morrill Act. By the way, did you know the history of the Morrill Act, Dave?
I did. Well, not really. That was a great summary that you gave, and especially the fact that there were two sections of the Morrill Act. First, establishing the land grants, and then establishing the separate but equal policy. So that was cool.
Well, when you think about it, it's a really important part of history because prior to the Morrill Act, education was mostly for the noblesse. What's that term, man? You know I don't know my Latin.
Noblesse oblige.
See, there you go. Every time I try to sound sophisticated with the Latin, I mess up. It just was. And, I mean, when you're talking about, you heard all those schools, Illinois, Wisconsin, Berkeley, on and on and on, right? I mean, how many great institutions were founded there?
Well, what was impressive was, 300 engineers to a couple decades later leading the world in the production of engineers. And I'm sure the United States found that very helpful as we entered the period of the 20th century and a couple pretty important wars there.
Exactly. So initially, A&T offered instruction just in agriculture, English, horticulture, and math. I'm going to highlight some of the key, in my opinion, historical landmarks of the school. So 1928, the college becomes co-ed, admitting female students. That was an important year. 1957, the college becomes Agricultural and Technical College of North Carolina. And the North Carolina General Assembly redefines the purpose of A&T to teach agricultural and technical arts and sciences, such as branches of learning relating to the training of teachers, supervisors, administrators of the public schools, including master's degrees. And then in 1960, a famous photo that you've seen on my wall at my house, Dave, 4 freshman students at A&T initiate the lunch counter sit-in demonstrations.
That's right.
They became known as the A&T 4, and their nonviolent protests start a wave of sit-ins that lead to ending segregation in North Carolina and across the South. So all the famous sit-ins, they started right on the A&T campus, and the famous 4 people to this day, are known for that. From, you know what photo I'm talking about, Dave? It's on our wall.
Yeah, you got it, man. The wall of history.
Yeah, awesome. 1967 is another important year. This was the year that the regional university by the North Carolina General Assembly renamed them North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State. And then in 1972 is a very important year because they actually joined the UNC, the University of North Carolina system. They become one of 17 schools within the public state system for North Carolina. And with that comes a lot of support and resources. And then I'm going to jump all the way ahead, take a big leap to 2009. This is when Dr. Harold Martin, is formerly the A&T Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Dean of Engineering, is elected as the Chancellor. Now he becomes the first A&T alumnus. That in of itself would make history. I wouldn't have pointed it out as a key landmark. The reason I am is because the school is just absolutely soared under his visionary leadership for the last 12 years. So he's really the one that's just completely taken the school and put it on the map. And let's talk about a few things. There's a $153 million endowment. It's the largest public endowment of any HBCU. And then in this last year alone, Dave, they brought in 6 times more than they normally bring in money.
Wow.
And by the way, Anika's a part of that. She's in that alumni office, connected to the advancement office. That's part of what she does.
That's right. She's the rainmaker.
Yeah, so they just announced their proceeds from their campaign, and they blew everybody away. Now, it didn't hurt that Mackenzie Scott gave them $45 million, former wife of Jeff Bezos, and she said, "I've studied your school. I'm so impressed. You do whatever you want with it, no strings attached." That's not normally how big gifts are given.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but it's not only that. They've had multiple gifts that blew away their record in this last year. So they're in a very strong place. Now, they're one of 5 public HBCUs in the state of North Carolina, along with North Carolina Central, Winston-Salem State, Fayetteville State, and Elizabeth City. No other state in the country has 5 public HBCUs. And these schools have had so much success recently, particularly A&T and Winston-Salem State, a little bit with Elizabeth City, that just in April of this year, the North Carolina Council allowed them to abandon a rule that had been in place for 30 years, which said that you could only take 18% of people from out of state. And they're like, look, people are banging our doors down out of state. We can be more selective. We can attract a stronger student. And obviously they pay more tuition. So just in April, Dave, they allowed them to go up to 25% from 18% out of state.
Awesome.
Now, the truth of the matter is some of the schools had been pushing that, including A&T. They've been pushing that 18% number. But the way the legislation was written was if you push it, then you're going to get a heavy fine levied on you. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about their academic programs. They have 8 different colleges within the school. College of Art, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. 166 students a year come in there. This is the largest college of agriculture of all HBCUs in the country. It produces the most Black grads with agricultural degrees. They have 4 different departments, 12-degree programs in there. A&T produces the most landscape architects of any HBCU. The second most Black students admitted into any vet programs come out of A&T. And 1/3 of all the external funding the school gets comes from this department that does research on food security, food safety, nutrition. In fact, here's another quiz for you. There are 17 public schools in the North Carolina system. A&T is the 3rd most in terms of funding. Take a guess which 2 are 1 and 2 get the most federal funding.
Well, NC State has to be up there.
Number 2.
Okay, and number 1 would be University of North Carolina.
You got it. 1 and 2, Chapel Hill and NC State. But of all the 17, and there's a lot in there, including several other UNCs like Charlotte and Wilmington and Greensboro, on and on and on. A&T is number 3.
Awesome.
Another strong program, College of Arts and Humanities and Social Sciences. It's the 4th biggest program. Then there's the Will A. Deese College of Business and Economics. 369 students a year come in there. That's the 3rd largest program. Very strong program. Business, A&T is known for strong business. A lot like Clemson, strong business, strong engineering. But then you have these other areas that are strong and strong agriculture like Clemson. But remember, Clemson was one of those land-grant schools. Most of those land-grant schools, if you look at them, the Wisconsins, the Illinois, Dave, they have strong agricultural, ag business, food science, and they have strong engineering.
And it would make sense because, of course, at that time in our history, agriculture was the economic engine of the country.
Correct. And then they emphasize engineering. Michigan State, where I went, very strong agricultural, strong engineering. I mean, that's what you'll consistently find with those land-grant schools. College of Education is the smallest college. It only has 41 students, but it's strong. You know, Joy applied there for her Master's of Counseling. In fact, it was her 3rd choice. Hampton was her 2nd choice. A&T was her 3rd choice. And they called her in for an interview, but she said, you know what? I know I want to go to NC State. So she declined, but it was actually her 3rd choice because their College of Education is strong. College of Engineering, definitely reputationally would be the strongest one in all their programs. And most of their 8 schools, if you look at them, their average GPA to get in is between 3.4 and 3.6. The College of Engineering, Dave, it's a 3.85.
Wow.
So it's like by far the most competitive. Average test scores will probably be over 1,200 this year. They were just a tad under 1,200 last year. They have 10 accredited ABET programs, that's the gold standard for engineering, is you get ABET accredited. 10 undergrad ABET accredited programs, 8 masters, 5 doctoral programs. And some of the strong programs: agricultural engineering, that shouldn't be surprising, architectural engineering, biomed, chemical, civil, computer engineering, electrical engineering, industrial engineering, mechanical engineering. And some of these programs have all the way to the doctoral level. Like you can get your doctorate in electrical, your doctorate in industrial, your doctorate in mechanical. You have to have a really strong faculty to be able to offer PhDs at the engineering level. And then they have something called surveying engineering. And don't ask me what that is because I've never heard of it. Just being honest, surveying engineering. But I'll tell you, I could, I work with so many students who go here, especially at KIPP, where most of the students I work with are Black. 3 or 4 a year go there. The most popular HBCUs are North Carolina A&T, Howard, and Spelman, of all the students I work with. And then I'll work with maybe 1 a year outside of KIPP that will go here. I have a student here right now who, first he got there and he's a little frustrated because the dorms weren't to his liking. But they have such an incredible co-op program that at the end of the first semester, he already had a co-op offer with General Motors. Then I bumped into a friend of mine who I went to grad school with. We were at a funeral, and I hadn't seen him in 24 years, Dave. And I said, man, Brent, Brendan, what's going on? What's going on? Give me an update. He said, well, my son graduated from MIT. He's an engineer. And we got to talking. I said, what was MIT like? He said, it was okay. But if he had to do it over again, he would have either gone to A&T or Georgia Tech.
Wow.
So it can compete with anybody. All right, a few more programs. The John and Kathy Hairston College of Human and Health and Human Sciences is the biggest program with 442 students. And then College of Science and Technology, 293. And then they have a very advanced program, mostly for PhD level stuff. It's a joint school of nanoscience and nanoengineering. And that just sounds like it would give me a migraine, man. Nanoscience and nanoengineering.
That sounds like something out of Tony Stark, Iron Man.
Yeah, whatever that is. Sounds like it. I don't know these pop culture
the
references.
Avengers, dude. Come on. You haven't seen The Avengers?
No, I haven't. Was that? I'm out of it with pop culture. You should know that about me.
Just the #1 movie in the last several years, Endgame.
I'm not the movie buff like you.
I'm going to have to come down to Atlanta and bring some DVD collection, get you up to speed on life, man. Don't know the
Good luck getting a DVD player in our house anymore. Good luck with that. It's all streaming. Some notable distinctions for A&T: the most Black engineers in the nation. They graduate more Black engineers than anybody. Georgia Tech second, by the way. The most Blacks in agricultural careers in the nation. They're the leading producer of African-American kinesiology undergrads, and the #1 producer of landscape architects, and way up 1 or 2 for journalism, mass communication grads. So those are some other really strong programs like journalism, mass communications. They've got multimedia. They've got mass media production. They've got public relations. They're one of 3 academic journalism departments in North Carolina that's accredited by the American Council of Education in Journalism and Mass Communications. So that's an underrated, very strong program. In fact, I had one of the students that went there, and she just got these incredible internships every single summer. And then before she was done her junior year, she did one in Dallas, Texas. I think it was with Sprint. And they offered her a full-blown job before she even came back and finished her senior year. I mean, it was contingent upon her graduating, but the salary and everything was already negotiated. Kinesiology is very strong. Exercise science, they've got an exercise science track and a recreational sports management track. And graduates are employed in a variety of sports, fitness, recreation environments. Just a really strong program. And then co-ops, they are one of the top co-op schools in the country. Every major allows for co-op. Any undergraduate or graduate student can enroll in a co-op program. And so that's one reason why a lot of students I work with go there. They also have the Southeast's largest job fair, huge job fair. But they they do everything out of their career services. Their OCS, they call it, Office of Career Services. They're doing externships, co-ops, fellowships, graduate assistantships, internships, professional development, 24 hours, on-campus student employment, part-time research. It's a very, very, very strong program. Their top 10 majors: management number 1, psychology, sports science and fitness management, biology, journalism, mass communication, nursing, criminal justice, animal science, mechanical engineering, and computer science. Extremely popular. A lot like Clemson, they really draw from 10 southeastern states and mid-Atlantic states with a little bit into the Midwest, but I'll get into that with stats. Just say one or two more things. I'll ask what popped for you for the strengths, and then we'll do stats. So I want to say this: the real strength of A&T is the balance that they have between high-level academics and support. And the students I have, they go there for that reason. Like, I worked with a student a few years ago. The brother went to Georgia Tech. The sister had a big decision, Georgia Tech or A&T. And she said, you know what, AT&T, you got me saying it. AT&T, it's just a supportive environment. It's like such a supportive environment. I love tech. You get great jobs, but it's so intense. The sister said, I want to go for the place that's got the balance between strong academics and support. So she ended up doing A&T, and they both are now out, and they're both doing extremely well in their careers. You know, one's been out 1 year out of college, one's been out 3. So another strength is just the Aggie pride, real school spirit, not just the sports school spirit, but just that privilege and feeling like you're in an incredible institution. You're proud to be there. Their career center is amazing. I already mentioned that. Job fairs, internships, co-ops. They're pretty incredible. And then the alumni support and the alumni support network. I mean, they all come back. Homecoming. It's not just homecoming. They really network and support each other. So those are my takes, Dave. What popped for you? And before I ask you what popped, I have one question. Who is the most famous alum from A&T? And then tell me what popped. What do you think?
Anika Bryant. That's right.
Did you say Anika Bryant? Her last name would be Madden, by the way,
Madden,
Dave.
sorry.
You're trying to be smart. You can't even get her co-host last name right.
Sorry. The night shift is catching up to me. Sorry, Anika.
Yeah, Dave's just getting off a night shift, so you got to cut him some slack.
Edit that out. Anika Madden for me.
There you go. See, look, man, you're taking a politically correct way. How am I supposed to challenge that? The answer would be Jesse Jackson, 1964. Most famous alum.
Okay, cool.
You know. All right. So what jumped out for you, Dave?
Well, what a wonderful history of our African American community and education, and the role that it's played, not just in building up the middle class, but in also shaping our nation, and the central role that A&T has played in our civil rights movement.
See, I can't even laugh at you anymore because you're pulling an evening shift. You're literally getting off of who knows what he did, you know, with gangbangers and everything. And now I'm feeling sorry for you. So now I have to cut my little wit out over here and let you do your thing.
Sorry, man. Sorry. But, you know, it's a wonderful role that it's played, both in the growth of our middle class for our community and our nation. And also for the progression of the civil rights movement. So I think A&T has played a wonderful role and really is one of the great institutions when you look at it from all of those perspectives. It's very impressive that it graduates still the most amount of African-American engineers. And I've looked at the growth of its campus. I mean, it's really exploded in recent years. I mean, it went from just 6,000 less than 10, 12 years ago to over 12,000 now. Isn't that correct, Mark? So it's really
in 1999, there were 6,000.
Okay, 1999.
But now we're at 13,000, and the goal to hit 15,000 by 2028.
Yeah, so very, very impressive. And so the numbers speak for itself. And I love their mascot.
Yeah, of course. You got it right, too. You know, we talk about how important leadership is. Can't underestimate the importance of leadership. And I think what Dr. Harold Martin has done as the chancellor, so many of the things in the last 12 years have his fingerprints on them for being a visionary.
Yep.
So here we go. Some stats. Enrollment is pushing 13,000, just a tad under right now. Full-time enrollment, almost 11,000. And that part-time, a little 1,919. Undergraduate, almost 11,000. Over 1,500 grad students. More male than female, 55% female. I'm sorry, more female than male, 55% female, 45% male. as far as underrepresented or black families comprise the overwhelming majority of the school, but there are other races. So 1,529 students altogether would identify as either international, Asian, or white. That breaks down large international community. So in the most recent class coming in, 103 Latinx, 124 biracial, 48 white students, 10 Asians, 1961 black, and then the rest international. 74% in-state. And your top states, North Carolina, number 1, Maryland, number 2, Virginia, 3, South Carolina, 4, Georgia, 5, New Jersey, 6, New York, 7, Ohio, 8, Pennsylvania, 9, and D.C. And then it's 188-acre campus, and it's often referred to as Aggieland. That's the main campus. That's located just 9 blocks from downtown Greensboro. Greensboro has almost 300,000 people, so it's not small. But there's also a 482-acre agricultural campus, including a working farm. Mentioned already, one of 17 universities in the University of North Carolina system, almost 2,000 faculty members. And Dave, you're going to love this. You know, Dr. Lincoln Penny likes a bargain.
Yeah, that's right.
Full cost of attendance, $35,000 out of state, $21,000 in state.
What a bargain. That is amazing. That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, Dave, I can see you are running on a low octane, man.
No.
This is low energy, Dave, man.
Oh,
so I feel like I was going to talk about. We could talk about it next week because some huge decisions came down for California, as far as.
No, let's talk about it.
You want to talk about it? Okay.
Yeah,
all right. You got another life. So why don't you mention California, and then I'm going to say something about Georgia that also had a big decision.
Well, a federal judge. The crux of it is that the University of California system are not going to go back to the SATs or the ACTs, and that's permanent. So, Mark, why don't you give the
they've agreed to extend court mandated policy, test blind through 2025, according to different advocacy groups that had argued that the use of SAT and ACT discriminates against applicants because, as we've said many times, test scores are so highly correlated with income, family education. They also added disability, race. And so that has been upheld, and you will not see test scores. This is not test optional. This is test blind.
And this is permanent,
but at the same time, they made that decision. Well, through 2025, at least they've said. At the same time they've made that decision, the University of Georgia just came out and said their USG system will be requiring test scores for the class of 2022.
Whoa.
So I was surprised by that because Alabama just 2 weeks ago said, no, we're going test optional for our state. And I personally think Georgia is making a mistake. Not that test scores may not have some element of validity, but there's some regional publics that struggle from attendance standpoint. And all of a sudden, you're putting yourself in a very non-competitive stance. If almost everybody around you is not requiring them, then you are. It will be no problem for Georgia Tech, and Kennesaw State and some others, Georgia State, some others, but I know some schools whose names I won't mention who are struggling financially, and I'm sure they are not liking this even a little bit.
Is it because Georgia has that generous scholarship program, Mark?
No, because the thing about Georgia's program, at least the Hope Scholarship, is not tied to test scores. Now, Zell Miller is the most generous of them. It is tied a little bit to test scores. See, remember last year, Florida was the only state that didn't go test optional? Their whole program, Bright Futures, is totally tied to test scores, and that was the reason why they didn't do it.
Next week, in the news, the urgency of micro-credentials, John Marcus, the Hechinger Report. Our question from a listener is part 2 of 2. Do West Coast liberal arts and science colleges that offer merit money also provide rigor for a strong student that needs to be challenged? Our interview is part 2 of 3 by Vince Garcia. The UCs were extremely difficult to get into this year. What changed? And our college spotlight comes to you from Lisa Ruff. It is Wake Forest.
Yeah, so now that Lisa's in North Carolina, she's getting out and visiting some of these North Carolina campuses as well as her Midwest schools that she knows. So she'll be mixing it up between the Carolinas and some of the Midwest schools. And looking forward to that. Thanks, Lisa.
Awesome.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Modfitch. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.